No, okay, okay, I think I see it.
That's
I
okay.
didn't notice it.
I actually already started it, and I'm gonna stop the transcription. And then, yeah, thanks everybody for joining us for the technical working groups for phase 4, track 2, that where we're going to talk about the ramp and GRC data templates. I'm going to start us off with a safety culture message. Guard your digital life. Apparently, Forbes magazine reports that cyber attacks occur every 39 seconds on average, with businesses being targeted every 11 seconds. These attacks affect over 343 million victims annually, and proper cybersecurity practices can reduce the risk of identity theft, the financial loss, and unauthorized access to your personal information. And it helps to protect you and your digital life. So a couple of cybersecurity tips could be like using strong passwords. You can create unique complex passwords for each of your accounts and use a combination of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols, and avoid using easily guessed information like birthdays or names. And then you can also enable two-factor authentication when it's possible as an extra layer of security. And this adds like a verification step to ensure your accounts are protected, usually using a cell phone of some kind or some type of app. And then you can also keep your software up to date by regularly updating both your operating system, your apps, and software, and use latest security patches. And then be cautious with emails and links. I know our IT is very clever at sending us emails and ability to recognize that they're fake. And I'm sure ITs around the world do that. But also be wary of actual unsolicited emails, especially those asking for personal information or containing suspicious links or attachments, as phishing attacks are a common way for hackers to gain access to your data. And if you have interest in finding out more, we also will provide a link in the chat. Second. All right. Which will also help me determine if everybody is able to see the chat. And if you don't, please let us know by raising your hand, and we will try to help you work on that. So as some of you may have known that when I first started speaking, this meeting is going to be recorded. One or more decision makers may be present in a meeting, but no decisions will be taken. I'm not sure if there's any decision makers on the call at this moment. And then let's just do a quick roll call to make sure that who's on the line. Is Southern California Edison here?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Is the California Public Advocate's Office here?
Yes, we are here.
Great. Thanks, guys. Is Pacific Gas and Electric here?
Yes, we're here.
Present.
Okay, great. And is the Utility Reform Network here? Anybody from Turn? Okay. Anybody from the Semper companies?
Good morning. Yes, we're here, Eddie. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anyone from Energy Producers and Users Coalition and Indicated Shippers, EPUC-IS? Okay. Anyone from Mussy Grade Road Alliance, MGRA? Okay. Anyone from Protect Our Communities Foundation, PCF? And the Utility Consumers Action Network. Okay, are there any other parties that would like to be identified for this meeting? And if anybody does want to be identified but didn't have a chance to speak up, please put that in the chat. So our agenda is, at least for today, it's pretty fixed in the sense that we're generally going to have we're only going to have Southern California Edison present today on their ramp and GRC data templates. There's going to be, most of the time is going to be pretty dedicated to just having a conversation and there's going to be lots of room for Q&A. I'm expecting that there's probably going to be a lot of bouncing between data templates and maybe the data template guideline. And so actually Dan is going to take over the slides here shortly for Southern California Edison. But I also just wanted to mention that, like, in general, technical working groups are meant to be kind of an informal process. And, that's why I have my working cap on, and that way I don't have to think about my receding hairline for the entire week. And also, we're going to have presentations from, the three utilities on the 27th and 28th of January, and then this will all be next week. And then Cal Advocates will present on the 29th, and SPD will be presenting on the 30th. We do have an extra day for general discussion if folks feel that that's necessary. What we'll do is after SPD finishes on the 30th, we'll probably issue like a general poll and see how folks feel. And if there's anyone that feels that the 31st is still necessary for continued conversation, we can pick back up. And on that day, we could have a conversation about any of the templates that have been discussed over the last week. And so, yeah, and even in today, if or any of these days, if the conversation starts to dwindle, I think what we'll do is we'll take a general poll and just ask folks if we would like to end early, and we're happy to do so. We can then pause for the next day to continue the conversation. So that's the general outline of the agenda. And then I just wanted to, briefly mention about like, actually, before I get into that, I did want to just run through a couple of kind of like attendee participation things. The first is that if you do have any IT related questions, they can be directed to Joseph Haga. And Joe, could you put your email in the chat just in case folks need to email you with a question and can't get in touch with you via the chat box. And then and just to read it out in case you're having trouble with the chat. We've had folks struggle with the chat lately. It's Joseph.Haga, HAGA @cpc.ca.gov. And then attendees should have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. I haven't seen that be a problem. Looks like everybody is able to unmute. It needs to do so. But we do ask that folks stay muted during the presentations. While SE is presenting today, we'd ask that you kind of hold your questions until they finish their presentation. But like I said, there's going to be lots of opportunity for Q&A. But you could post questions in the chat at any time. And just, yeah, and I think the chat in this case is different than WebEx. You don't have to worry about whether or not you're posting to everyone. As long as it goes into the chat box, I think everyone will be able to see it. So no worries there. And if there's not enough time for either us or the presenters to respond to the questions in the chat box, SPD will collect those questions and circulate them to the service list after the workshop. If you could, during the discussion, please remember to use the hand raise feature, and I'll try to call on folks in order, but then after you finish your question, just remember to kind of lower your hand. I think Teams may even lower it for you at times, but anyway, just try to keep your eye out for that. Yeah, so in terms of just the purpose and outcomes of the working groups, I mentioned that this is meant to be a little bit informal, but I also just wanted to kind of level set that the idea was to allow different parties to present their version of a data template that they would like to see submitted with RAMP and GRC applications, and we would go through both justifications for the different types of fields that would be in the template, and then also just the structure of the template, which I think can generate some interesting discussion. And then, we're hoping to receive some feedback, during each of the discussions. We're hoping that there'll be some feedback on, what fields, the field descriptions and the field value constraints that the commission should include within a data template and data template guideline. So that's the general order of things for today and for all of next week. So I probably won't go through this again during the beginning of the other technical working group days. And I also just wanted to mention that, each of these days there's going to be a recording, and we are asking the three large utilities to create working group summaries. And this is the order in which each utility is responsible for completing the working group summary. So today, Pacific Gas and Electric is going to be summarizing for the discussion of SCE's templates. And there is a question, first, I just wanted to mention that the YouTube recordings come out every 3 to 4 days or so. But I will probably consolidate at the very end and send the YouTube links out as one email blast to the service list. But I'll, as they come available, though, I'll share them with the team that is doing the working group summary, because I know that the recordings can be helpful for completing the working group summaries. We've set it so that February 7th will be the day that the final working group summary is shared with all participants. I wanted to ask, though, I think Dan Comula had raised an interesting question, which was, would parties like to receive all of the working group summaries at once, and then they start the review on the 7th, or would they appreciate receiving them as they are completed? And then each of the teams could share those with folks as they are completed. And I can do we can either do a raised hand, or I created a little poll within Teams, and I can share that with folks. So you can actually respond there, or you can, just raise your hand if you had any questions about that. Let's see. Okay, so far. It looks like consolidated together, but I mean, really, this is also primarily to help the interveners who are going to be providing feedback on this. So if anybody wanted to raise their hand and just talk about this real quick, you're more than welcome to, because we're at 50-50 at the moment. Does anybody have a preference, Chris or Anna or any of the other participants?
I voted individually as they're finished, just so that while the working group is kind of fresher in our mind. That's my idea.
Okay. Do folks from the utilities, do you guys have a real preference for consolidating together, or can you actually do each one individually, and as they're finished, you could share them? And that would just mean that, the Semper companies, it would just mean that, for January 31st, you would share that at least before February 7th.
At least for SE, I think we're probably indifferent. I think, as I mentioned, depending on the length of discussions, if they're shorter or longer, it may change people's preferences if the summary is going to be relatively short. But I would say at least SCE, we're probably indifferent.
Hey, Eddie, it's Josh. For SoCal Gas and SCJ, I agree with Dan. We're indifferent.
Yeah. How about we do this? I would recommend that the utilities try to share them as they come out, and then the bottom line, though, is just that they all have to be shared by February 7th.
That works.
And then, okay, great. And then for Cal Advocates or any of the other participants, participants, just please make sure to provide any responses to the utilities by the 14th, because those summaries then have to be submitted to the docket by the 17th. And I'll go over all that timeline on our final day. That'll be one of the last things we do as we wrap up here. Yeah, Dan, go ahead.
Quick, I didn't want to cut off if it's a slightly different topic, just make sure if we're good on that one. So I noticed the scoping ruling or scoping memo didn't have any written comments after this. So can you kind of walk us through how you plan on like translating these workshops into like the PD? Like, will there still potentially be an opportunity, or are you thinking that we'll come to a complete consensus? Just want to get a little bit thoughts for procedurally how this might move forward. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Dan. No, there may still be an opportunity to file comments, opening and reply comments on these summaries and on the data templates after everything's been filed onto the docket. That's really up to the judge's discretion, and so yeah, I will. We'll definitely have a conversation internally at the commission about the best steps to move forward. But that is a possibility.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. Any additional thoughts or questions or concerns about that? Any other kind of logistical questions that folks have before we get started, before I kind of shift this over to Dan and SCE? Okay. If not, I think that's where we're going to start. We're a little bit over time, and I apologize, Dan, for taking more time than I expected, but I will shift it over to you.
All right. I think Gary will be presenting from from SCE. Just want to make sure you guys can see my screen here.
Yep, looks good.
All right.
Should we go to the next slide, please? Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the SBD staff and other parties on this call for attending this workshop today. My name is Gary Chen from SE's ERM department, and I am here to discuss SE's RAMP data template proposal. This is going to be the first in a series of at least 5 and potentially 6 workshops lasting through Thursday or Friday of next week. So before I dive into the specific tables and the specific fields, I want to provide some context and opening remarks on this specific topic. So when SE files this RAMP report, we not only include the large PDF file that I'm sure everyone is aware of. It was last time, I think it was close to around 700 pages, but we also provide a comprehensive set of supporting documents that includes data templates, risk models, supporting work papers, and RC calculation files. So let me spend a few minutes discussing each of them. Data templates, these are the output files of the RC calculations. These can include cost files. These can also include the scope files for each mitigation. The risk models themselves are the models that calculate, for example, the baseline risk in the test year and the baseline risk at the end of the GRC period, for example. Supporting work papers are just additional documents that we provide that have detailed explanations or calculations that support our filings. And we also have the RC calculation files. These are Excel files which have the detailed RC calculations, which enables parties to tweak a parameter and see the new RC calculations. So why do I discuss these supporting documents? The reason I'm talking about these supporting documents is that we leverage what we have previously provided in developing the data template that you'll see on the next slide. So it's also crucial to understand that what additional insights parties are seeking beyond what SE has already provided, so that by gaining this additional clarity, we can make sure our efforts are aligned. Now, I also want to discuss data volume and the new information. So we provide a lot of information, and that can be at times overwhelming and counterproductive if it's not actionable. So I know oftentimes it's tempting to ask for as much information as possible. We also need to focus on delivering data that is meaningful and actionable. For example, in SE's 2022 RAMP filing, we produced 2.5 million rows of RCs, which I know we've had some feedback that was a really large file. So we want to just make an observation that new requirements, given the new discount rate scenarios, could potentially increase that size of a really large volume worth of data. In addition, we also want to make sure that there are challenges in when we look at defining a new template in the evolving RRU and RSAR requirements. Those requirements are still in flux, so it's really hard to define what the finish line is in terms of defining a data template when you don't really know what the finish line is. So some of our guiding principles should be to ensure that our efforts are efficient, that we minimize or eliminate duplicative work. So with that said, let me ask Dan to move on to slide number 2, please. So slide number 2 represents SE's proposal on our data template. It'll consist of 4 main tables. Table number 1 is the mitigation modeling inputs. So this would show the mitigation effectiveness values at the driver or consequence values, and it shows the useful life of that particular mitigation, as well as accompanying rationale or data sources of why we think this mitigation effectiveness is this particular number. Our second table is the mitigation cost and work unit forecast. So this shows our forecasted spend for each mitigation, including foundational spend and work units by year and tranche as applicable. Our baseline risk inputs shows how we developed our baseline risk number. So that includes frequency/probability and or consequence values. How do we our data sources and how we are subdividing them into tranches. The results table is really driven by the risk beneficiency or benefit cost ratio in our new ramp. So how do we subdivide those benefit cost ratios? We subdivide it by risk, by the control or mitigation name, by tranche, by the scenario, which is as you know, we're required to do a proposed plan plus 2 alternative plans. We have it by year, we have it by discount rate scenario, right? And then in I believe the phase 2 or phase 3, we are required to have 3 discount rate scenarios. We are also providing pre and post mitigated risk numbers, the net present value of the benefits and spend, and then finally the benefit cost ratios. So 4 tables in total. So let's go on to the next slide where we'll deep dive into each of these specific tables. So data table number 1 is our mitigation modeling inputs. There's a lot of fields and a lot of data types. I really want to focus the attention on that. For each mitigation, it will have a description of the mitigation name, the mitigation effectiveness by the driver. So we don't have just mitigation effectiveness for, let's say, cover conductor is 70%. We have it at the subdriver level. The mitigation effectiveness for veg by cover conductor, right? The mitigation effectiveness for equipment type for cover conductor, right? So at the subdriver level. And then we also provide rationale, like why do we choose, I don't know, 80% for a particular subdriver for cover conductor, right? So we provide also a rationale as well. So that's at a high level what we propose in terms of mitigation modeling inputs. There's a lot of fields and a lot of field types. I don't want to go through each and every one, but happy to address any questions after we go through all the data tables. Number 2, data table number 2 is our mitigation cost and work unit forecast. Again, by each risk, by each mitigation we have, and by each tranche we have a spend by year, and then we also have the unit type, which is, for example, is this mitigation by circuit miles? Is this mitigation by the number of buildings we're retrofitting? That's what the unit type is. And then we also have the estimated work units or the scope, for example, 2,000 miles of cover conductor or how many buildings we're planning to retrofit over the next couple of years. So that's at a high level what our cost and work unit data table represents. Next slide, please. So in order to calculate risk, we need to understand again, when we calculate risk, we also calculate risk by the different tranches or how we develop the tranches. So we have it at the subdriver level. How do we come up with a certain probability/frequency for a particular driver, how do we come up with the consequences again, and then we also provide the rationale for how we came up with those numbers. So that establishes the baseline risk numbers. Next slide, please. And number 4, it's the output file, really. If you look at the focus on the last row, that's the benefit cost ratio, right? That's kind of the ultimate output. So how do we differentiate all the benefit cost ratios? So we go from a risk, kind of a hierarchy, right? So you start with the risk name, you then control name or mitigation name, then we then go to the tranche level, then we go to the specific scenario, whether it's a proposed scenario, alternative 1 or alternative 2 scenarios. Then we also go down by year. Then we also go down by the different discount rate scenarios. And then we also provide the pre-mitigated risk and then the post-mitigated risk, as well as the NPV benefits and spend. So you'll see this is the entire row. So each row represents the entire ultimate BCR number. So that concludes our 4 data tables. So I don't know what the timeline is, but happy to open up the floor to questions or any feedback from the parties on the call.
Thanks,
And
Gary.
maybe just to add a little bit, I think, as Gary mentioned in the beginning, there were other like supporting documentations, the Excel risk models. And I don't think this is intended to say that we wouldn't still be providing those. This is just, trying to show one way that we think we can provide some of the data that parties are requesting. But just want to make it clear, it's not to say that we wouldn't still provide any additional information needed to justify our, our ramp and things of that nature.
Great. So we're actually still about now we've actually gained 4 minutes. So definitely open to any questions that folks have. And I'll give it a minute to see if anybody wants to raise their hand and go first.
And I think, as you mentioned, Eddie, like I do have, the Excel files that we did provide, and I think you provided to the service list as well as the PDF that basically is these slides in, just a PDF form. So I'm happy to bring those up. I have them on my other screen if others would like that when we're going through any of the discussion.
Maybe since nobody's raising their hand, I'm going to ask a kind of a start off clarifying question. The first was it was actually at the very beginning, Gary. You had mentioned that the RSE BCR calculation file, that it allows folks to make tweaks. Is that so? Are you referring to this summary file that's in your Excel that you shared with the service list? Is that the RSE BCR calculation file that you're referring to?
No. So when I think of data templates have no formulas, right? So when I refer to the RSE BCR calculation files, those are actual Excel files that we provided as work papers, where people can change the discount rate if they wanted to. They can change the mitigation effectiveness if they wanted to for real-time calculations. In my view, data templates are just a data template, right? There's no formulas in them.
I see. So that's why you're kind of clarifying, and I think Dan just clarified this at the end, that those types of calculation files that where they would have formulas, you would be able to still submit that with a rapid GRC filing.
Sure.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah, because some of our, risks are more Excel model based. And so in that Excel file, at least in the last ramp, obviously we're still going through the next one, you can make tweaks to that. But, for some of the machine learning things for wildfire and some of our other T&D risks, it's not as easy to provide those types of information. So we would provide a more detailed file that, shows either like segments or circuits and, all the subdrivers. And then, like Gary said, there is an input tab that you can look to tweak the discount rate. You could even tweak the effectiveness of drivers if you feel like it's a different value. And so it will allow you to then see the impact that has on, it used to be RSEs, but in the future will be BCRs.
I had one other clarifying question, and then hopefully we'll get some hands. I think it was maybe like, it might have also been the first slide. Maybe go back to that real quick, Dan. Yeah. At the very bottom, like I understand, Gary, that we're still talking quite a bit about the RRU and that might play a role within the way that data templates are presented. And maybe we can come back to that in a second. But you mentioned RSAR requirements. I wasn't aware that RSAR requirements were in flux, and I was curious about which requirements you were referring to.
I think that's a
All
typo
right,
and should have
it
been
was a
RMAR.
typo. I'm sorry.
Oh, was that referring to RMAR? RMAR
Yes.
requirement. Okay. And I guess maybe that does bring up one point. So then these types of data templates could also be in SCE's mind could also be used to help explain the reporting that is provided through the RMAR. So essentially, if somebody wanted to find out what was behind an RMAR calculation, they could ask for data, and you would essentially provide them with something that is similar to the template that you've provided us for this conversation.
I think I'll take a first stab at this, Gary. I think that really just depends on what the RMAR requirements end up being. But obviously there has to be some type of linkage between, a ramp, a GRC, and an RMAR. I mean, ultimately, the GRC is, I think, probably the more appropriate thing to be looking at from an RMAR perspective, because the ramp is still an estimate. It's not even our official funding request. But, I think as parties have mentioned, and I think it's very reasonable, there needs to be some level of traceability.
Fair enough. And, the idea is that this data template that you guys have provided us is relevant not just for a ramp application, but it's relevant to a GRC as well. Is that correct?
Yes, I do think we had some of these our ramp to GRC work papers were similar in some, and we may have made some tweaks at the GRC just based on presentation and organization of our rate case versus a ramp. And so, that will continue to evolve. But in general, yes, I feel like a lot of this information should be in both the ramp and the GRC. It just may change, in scope, in dollars, and stuff of that nature, just as we, move from the ramp to the rate case.
Yeah, no, not necessarily saying that the data is going to be identical, but just that the structure of the templates themselves is beneficial, not just for a ramp, but also for a GRC. Okay, let's see. Does anybody else have any other questions that they'd like to ask? Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Yeah, you got to come off mute, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just getting more used to the Teams environment. Thank you. I think, it's going to be very useful that you're also including fields to, I guess you mentioned the text to explain the rationale. I think that's going to be very helpful for folks, including us. Do you by chance have like any particular example of what that rationale statement might look like? Is it, do you envision it being like a page or a paragraph, or any thoughts on that?
I think Dan will bring up an example of what we filed in our previous ramp as an exemplar of what we mean by rationale or data source.
Yep, and so here is a wildfire. This may not be the final version that made it into the GRC. There may have been other changes, but you can see here, I think it really depends on and I don't know how hard this is to read on others. I'll try and zoom in and make some of these a little smaller from a column perspective. It really depends on, I think, the risk, the control, and the mitigation. Unfortunately, there might be some that we have to rely a little bit more on SME judgment. And so, if that happens, we also typically provide a work paper like outlining the specific SMEs and their work experience and kind of how they may have come up to those estimates. Some of them may be based on like historical data. Some may require outside sources, and we may provide a link then to that report or that publication as needed. So it really depends, but we try and give as much information, and parties are obviously always welcome to ask for any backup data that we have, but like due to the extreme volume of some of this stuff, we don't necessarily provide all of the supporting data behind it. We give you the narrative, and we're always happy, as I mentioned, to provide additional detail through discovery as needed.
Thank you. And I noticed you also it's your intent to use these templates to capture each of the alternatives that you've considered. Do I have that right?
Correct. So you can see here for this one, like covered conductor in our last ramp was in our proposed plan in alternative 1, but it wasn't in alternative 2. So if there was a new mitigation that was just in alternative 2, it would be a separate tab here for C28 or something, and we would indicate whether it was in there. But typically, like, we wouldn't necessarily change mitigation effectiveness if it's in a proposed alternative, but that's not to say that that couldn't happen. And so if it did, we may need to add an additional column of mitigation effectiveness proposed or mitigation effectiveness alternative in a rationale. But once again, that there needs to probably be a little bit of flexibility in some of these. I wouldn't say that there should be 100% like you have to do it this way, but I think having a little bit of that. Once again, I don't have an example of why you might change effectiveness in scenarios, but it could happen.
Okay, and is there also a field to provide a detailed rationale between picking the proposed over the alternatives as part of the data templates?
I think that's probably more appropriate for the narrative in the ramp. That's typically, I think, at least how SE has done it. I don't know about the other IOUs, but I believe so. Because I think that like sometimes the alternative is more of a plan, not an individual mitigation. So sometimes it's easier to talk about that at the plan level, which I think is easier at the narrative itself than in like a template.
Okay, and it does seem like it would be very helpful in the template, but thank you. Another kind of overarching question that I wonder if you might be able to discuss. So the ramp is going to develop the risks and analyze them, the mitigation proposals, and then feed into the GRC. Would you also be using this template for transmission risks and selection of risks for transmission that may not be fully covered in the ramp, or I'm sorry, may not be fully covered in the GRC? Do you?
So at least, from our previous experience, obviously we're going through the next round of our ramp and GRC cycles. If we had a ramp risk that made it into the GRC, like you would have seen a similar work paper like this in our GRC. So to the extent that we do have any transmission work that is in our generation or is in our GRC request, it's also part of our ramp. You would see something similar to this, or if it required the step 3 supplemental analysis, I want to say, I hope that's the correct one. Once again, if there was something like that, we would probably develop similar types of work papers if it met that requirement. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure.
That helps. I think
Okay.
it's a question which I think we're going to try to get a better understanding of over the course of these meetings, but thank you.
And maybe just to provide a little extra content. So this is was our example from our ramp. In our rate case, we may have added additional columns and said, like, if we change the mitigation effectiveness, if we change the useful life assumption, what it was in ramp, what we put in the rate case, and the rationale for why it may have changed. So once again, we may not have done that in every work paper, because if we didn't change assumptions, it would have just been a bunch of the same columns. So we try to be as transparent as we could in our assumptions, what led us to those assumptions, and any changes between the ramp and the rate case.
I guess what I'm trying to get a better understanding of is, so with the risk associated, let's say with electrical transmission, I'm trying to get a better understanding of analysis for different risk mitigation alternatives when it comes to the infrastructure for transmission, and how that is or is not captured in the ramp and the ramp data templates. I don't know if you have any insight into that.
At least from SE's experience, and I'll let Gary go after this, we go through the ERR, Enterprise Register Risk process. We look at our risks, we select them. In the last 2 ramps, we have talked about like transmission and substation asset risk as a qualitative appendix. It's we're still obviously in the nascent stages of our next ramp that we'll provide in May of 26. I can't speak to whether it will be qualitative or quantitative, but If it is a quantitative risk, you would expect it to have a similar work paper as this with, 2 alternative plans that are required and a similar level of detail. And even though I know like we do have transmission related work in our rate cases, even if it is FERC and things of that nature. So I don't see that as preventing it from making it into the rate case either. But it could be very scenario dependent.
I guess if there were risks associated with transmission towers or ways of mitigating a risk associated with transmission lines, would we expect to see those kind of analyses in the ramp and the GRC?
For ramp, this is Gary. For ramp, there is a methodical process, as Dan indicated, of how we select those ramp risks. As Dan indicated, we're still in the nascent stages of even kicking off the ramp process. So we don't know what risks will become ramp risks until much later on in the year.
And obviously being safety focused, and I know you have to do the top 40% safety scores and things of that nature. So we do look at it through the lens of safety and other things to determine what are the top safety risks that should be included. And like I mentioned, in the last 2 ramps, it was more of a qualitative discussion, but we are going through the process and we'll be revisiting everything as we prepare our next one.
Thank you.
Nobody else is going to raise their hand. I will start. Yeah, because there were a couple of questions that got raised. And actually, if you could go back to that example, either the example or the blank deck or the blank one would actually be fine, because I do have some other questions about the other tables. And it looked like the example that you just shared didn't necessarily have each one of these tabs. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was our actual work paper. Whether or not they'd all be combined in one Excel file for our ramp or rate case, to be determined. But
gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you could go to the ME values tab real quick, sorry. So yeah, my first question is related to the mitigation effectiveness values. Yeah, that particular option right there. I was just wondering, like, when this would be filled out in the in a template, because Gary was just saying that this wouldn't include like some type of a formula. So I was just curious, like, how is this calculated, and then what type of data sources are used to calculate this field?
I think we just go back to our cover conductor example, right, Dan?
Yeah, so it's very, very dependent. So there may not be a formula, but there might be an explanation of how we came up with that number. It was, X times Y based on these data and assumptions. Once again, there may be like a third-party study we use, and we would provide a link to that, or it's something else we'd have to attach as a PDF. It's just very dependent on the risk and the control itself.
I see. So and that's true for risks that are outside of the wildfire context?
Correct.
So essentially, it's a combination of either literature or some type of SME judgment that's being used in this location.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess just for that same the ME values tab, could you talk a little bit about why is the control ID, which I assume, depending on what that control ID is or mitigation ID, it changes the mitigation name, it changes the useful life rationale. What's the reason to make that like on a different how to describe it, like a different plane? Like, why didn't you include it within the horizontal list of variables that are here, like starting on row 8? You could have also just listed like control mitigation ID in column A next to the driver number. All 4 of those variables, could could have been given a horizontal row, and then that way you actually wouldn't need to have all those tabs breaking out. Is there a specific reason why you've structured the data template
So
in
I,
this
I
way?
can take this question. So this is the template that we used when we filed our ramp report to make a visually appealing of understanding what this particular mitigation is. When we actually, in our data template proposal, everything will be tabular, right, in tables, columns, and rows. So it will not have this format, but we're just kind of showcasing these are kind of the fields, and they will be put into a tabular format in the actual data template.
I think though, are you saying basically what you, and I'm just going to quick do this live. So you're saying we could just do control here.
Yeah.
C1. And so you could put all the tabs into one tab in an Excel file as opposed to having 30. I would say, like Gary said, it was a little bit of aesthetics. Also, like if someone's just very interested in looking at, let me go back to here. All right. Just interested in covered conductor, they could clearly go to this tab. They wouldn't necessarily have to filter a table, or if they were very interested in vertical switches. So it was basically, I don't know that there was a lot of decision behind it. It's something we could very easily do. I mean, there's nothing preventing us from doing it in that format. It's just a different way of looking at the data.
Yeah, I mean, just going to Gary's comment that like, a tabular format is certainly preferred in terms of doing data analysis, and so yeah, I think. But it sounds like, Gary, you're saying that you would develop an actual data template that would be in tabular form for the ME values. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. So maybe, I mean, just my recommendation would be then, when all of the parties, that are presenting, we're all going to be, kind of resubmitting our data template to the docket on February 17th. My recommendation would be to at least provide that example in your next Excel sheet that you're going to submit to the docket, just so that we could see what it looks like, and I think that would help in terms of everybody getting an understanding of what the final template would kind of look like. But I appreciate the idea.
And that makes sense. I'll let Vincent go in a second. I do think though there is, sometimes the explanations for the driver rationales and things can be quite lengthy. And so if you do put like all of it into one tab, it can get a little clunky from a visualization perspective, which I also think Gary was getting at. But I mean, clearly the data is all there. It's just Excel manipulation. It's not, a very technical exercise by any means. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, a data template technically could have both. You could have it in this format, and you could have it in the tabular format. Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, Vincent.
Yeah, so Eddie, your question kind of raises another question that I've been having, right? Which is basically, what are the use cases you're kind of envisioning for this data? You seem to want it in tabular normalized data format. Presumably, you have some ways of looking that you want to look at the data, right? And I think it'd be helpful to us to identify upfront what those use cases are. So we can kind of put together something that meets them.
Right. Yeah. So I think, Vincent, from pretty much all of your experience working with us on your most recent ramp application, I think that the general idea has been to try to understand how you came to some of the results and calculations. And it's very difficult to do any of that without the data being, structured in a tabular format. Yeah, I think that's a pretty straightforward understanding that tabular format, when you're trying to do any sort of analysis, even if it's just in Excel, having things in tabular format is a necessary structure for just doing general data analysis. I wouldn't want to box any of my colleagues in by saying like, we're only going to do this type of analysis. I just think that having tabular data is actually really important. And if any of my other colleagues who want to be more specific about what type of analysis they want to do, they're more than welcome to speak up, and so that I'm not the only one always speaking. But alternatively, I don't know, Chris, Parks, or Anna, if you guys have any thoughts or questions about why tabular formats are helpful and important.
So when you say tabular, your intention is to throw into a pivot table and look at it that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, tabular data is helpful for also generating, different types of visualizations, different types of, results tables and things like that. I mean, yeah, tabular, it's a standard for data analysis. I don't think that there's like anything beyond that, really. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I would just say tabular format, having it, if it's in other forms as well, that helps, but having it as a common format in tabular form, I think is very useful to us. I mean, that really helps us, for example, with the RSARs. So having it with that in the templates, and I think with the RMARs as well, it makes it easy to be able to filter, sort, and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah.
And maybe if I can try and so, kind of what I'm hearing is you're kind of looking for one centralized location with most of the key data that goes into a format ramp. Because as I mentioned, I don't know if we mentioned, but it's probably, I want to say impossible, but that's probably a strong word, to put everything into one file, especially if you want to be able to manipulate RSEs and calcs. So I think that is probably also going to have to be separate. But if you're really just trying to look for a tabular view of the key data inputs, and we can still provide work papers and other things in a different format that may be, I don't know, like I said, just more applicable to people that are looking at certain controls, certain mitigations, certain risks. I think, that seems pretty reasonable.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think that's the general understanding for the need for tabular data, but I appreciate the idea of having a more aesthetic presentation of these types of ME value tables. There's a good reason to present it in this way too, as you were mentioning regarding the rationale and being able to expand it and see it clearly in the table. So.
And I think this, when we do translate to a rate case, you'll have a witness that's in charge of certain things that have their own work papers. And so a massive tabular Excel file from a GRC,
sure.
witness, that we could always still provide that, and maybe our risk policy volume, like I think we do with all the RSE scores. But I think this format also just helps from that perspective to split it up as needed to integrate into the rate case. But understand that both are acceptable. So.
Yeah, and also here's another really important reason is that for the data analysts that are interested in doing tabular analysis, if you don't present it in tabular format, then we have to issue a data request asking for it, and it's a waste of everybody's time. If you present it directly in your RAMP application and your GRC application, the data is already there and accessible to everybody who is probably going to ask you for a data request for that data anyway. So it's kind of streamlining this process, and I think it'll save time at the utility as well. Let's see. For the baseline input table, I did have a couple of questions. I think it was about the outcome table, or the outcome portion of this table. I guess the question is like. This is a table that is separated by the T1 and T2 are time. Is that correct?
They're tranches.
Those are the different tranches I see, and so you're expecting that there's different outcomes that could occur within each tranche.
Yes.
Right. And do you know, in general, do you have is there a limit to the number of outcomes that you would expect within each tranche?
No.
Okay. And so
in theory, but obviously, we would try and keep it to a reasonable number of potential
Right.
outcomes. And so you can imagine, like, let's just say tranche one is the highest risk. You would expect the consequence values to probably be potentially higher and things of that nature. And so once again, you may see like certain drivers are applicable to, like, for office versus field employees, like there may be, probably office employees may not have tool equipment operation as a driver just because, we don't really operate with tools or equipment and, things of that. So that's kind of why you could see different values in different columns here.
And is SCE, imagining that each risk would have like a set of unique tranches?
Isn't that required?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we're aware of the best practices, the
Yes.
quintile approach, but I would
Okay.
imagine that all of our risks won't necessarily fit in there. So there will probably be some that
Okay.
we may have to write a white paper on that may not fit into that format. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Great. That's helpful. Yeah, because I was curious to know if you were expecting that there would be more than one risk that was associated with this particular page, but it sounds like this baseline input tab is specific to an individual risk, and that's helpful. That makes it a little bit more clear. I don't think I had another question on this particular one. Okay. Yeah, I guess the next question is just on it's kind of a combination of this and then the summary tab. If we could go to the summary tab real quick, I just want to refresh myself because it looks like the level of granularity at the summary tab is based on the tranche ID. So essentially, whatever the tranche like structure is in the baseline input tab, that's gonna inform column E. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so is this the minimum granularity that SCE envisions using with this particular data template? Because, well, I'll let you answer that first.
Based on the current requirements, we're aware of the RRU discussion, and that could impact how this would be presented.
Okay. And I guess the reason I ask is just that, and I understand that this template is structured to be relevant for all risks, and so it just that this particular page, this summary page, was recognizable to those of us that had worked on your 2022 ramp wildfire material and your GRC, and so we didn't see a column for something more granular than this, but in the previous ramp and GRC, there was a column, at least in the wildfire section, for like circuit segment, which was a very granular level. And in data request, we asked for something less granular, and I think you provided us with something called isolatable circuit segments. Does this all sound familiar, Gary?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, and so it's possible to add in a more granular level than tranche ID to this particular spreadsheet.
Yeah, I think anything's possible. I think maybe, like I said, maybe that's more appropriate for the RSE, the calc files, than it is for this, depending on how it wants to be used. But I mean, if the data is in Excel, as we kind of walk through, you can put it into tabular form. It's just it can get, like I think Gary mentioned, like what we called like the mega file, which was I think what you were kind of referring to. It was like millions of rows, and that we understood the feedback that can be difficult to navigate and things. So we obviously will consider exactly how we want to portray that in the next ramp to make things, digestible and still give the data that parties need. So I think, as you're aware, we have very granular data. And so it's really what is the appropriate level of detail that doesn't, bog everyone down with files that you really have to be very careful how you manipulate, or it starts to crash, that type of stuff.
Sure. Okay, and then maybe just a couple of other clarifying questions. So each of the tranche IDs also would have technically 3 scenarios. Is that correct? Because you would have the proposed and then 1 alternative and 2
Yeah, and I
alternatives.
think that's what you see on line 5, 10, and 11.
Exactly. Yeah. And then
Well, 3 scenarios and 3 discount rate scenarios.
Yeah, I didn't go
that's
through all
correct.
the iterations here. This was obviously a simplified version. So
No, that's understandable. And then so there would be 3 scenario discount rate scenarios. So you would technically see like a combination of 9 scenarios for each tranche.
and yeah, and I think that gets into like, I think we mentioned the data is expanding, the scenarios, the requirements. And so just want to be cognizant of, the multiplication of all these things when you get into the weeds of making sure that if we do go to a really granular level, just parties are aware of how many rows and how much data that will actually be.
And the also another filter in this file is going to be the year, because I'm assuming 2025 is like a test year,
Yep.
but then you would have the 3 post-test years as well. But
and maybe a 4-year look as well.
okay, great. That was going to be my question, because actually PG&E did this, and I think they've done it in most of their ramp applications where they've given a 4-year look for the year as well. I think
And I
that's a
think
really
we
good.
received that feedback from our ramp and then made that
Yeah.
change in our rate case, if I believe so.
Oh, actually, I don't remember that in the rate case data set, but okay, that's helpful to know that you guys are aware of that, and that having that 4-year outlook would be helpful. Could you scroll to the right just a little bit? I just want to make sure.
So real quick, do you want me to freeze it anywhere over here, or are you good?
No, that's okay. Yeah. Just wanted to make sure. Okay.
And so I think, like Gary was mentioning, like these would probably be hard-coded values from a data template, but there may be additional files that would show, how we converted, natural units to monetization and things of that nature, either in our Excel models or in an accompanying BCR RSE sheet.
Sounds good. Actually, I just realized that it's 11 o'clock. Why don't we take a quick break, Dan, if you want to throw the break slide up, and we'll come back.
Can I throw out, unless you have a lot more questions, like, I don't know if it's just a little bit longer, we could probably plow through it. At least I think I'll speak for SE and say we'd be willing to do that. But obviously, if others want to take a break, I'm happy to take a break.
I will, let's see, leave it. I think we'll take a break, actually. Let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back just to give some folks some time to think if they want to ask some additional questions. And I don't want to be the only one that's, asking questions the whole time. So I want to make sure that other folks have the opportunity. So yeah, let's come back in 10 minutes at 11:12, and we'll continue the discussion.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. All right. Use the sound of my voice to bring us all back. See some thumbs up. That's great. And Dan, I see you're off mute, so that's good.
And I did want to revisit a topic when we have a chance, but continue.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead. I don't see any hands raised, so I have some small questions that are kind of related to the guideline document, and we can go to that next. But yeah, please go ahead, Dan.
Sure. I was thinking more a little bit about the tabular stuff versus kind of the way we had it formatted slightly different. And I think another reason for that is and let me try and bring up exact examples again here. When we create like our work papers and we convert something from Excel to, a PDF,
Sure.
it's easier to do it like this. The tabular, if it's, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of rows, yeah, you can convert it to a PDF, but I mean, it'd be an eyesore of 500 pages. So I think that tabular format, if that's eventually what does get adopted, if something does, it would probably just have to be provided as an Excel file. You really couldn't put that as easily on the record because it would be like a 1,000-page document if you PDF'd it. And so that's one thing that I think in general, we would probably still have a slightly different format for what we would consider a work paper that we would attach as a PDF versus, I don't want to call it a data dump, but like, a large data file.
No, yeah, that's understandable. And I think generally, my understanding, at least in both the ramp and the GRC, is that it's been expected that filing things to the docket, you have to convert everything to PDF. But with data sets, I think typically there's a PDF that provides a link to the data set itself. And because we're not allowed to put Excel files on the docket directly, but there's ways to ensure that that information is accessible and on the record. And so yeah, still having the tabular data submitted as part of the record is, I think, a pretty straightforward process. So, but I appreciate the point that you were trying to make there.
Hello, Edwin. This is Blake from IT. Joe had to step out to help somebody, but I'll be here in the chat. So
Okay.
if anybody needs any help, they can contact me as well.
Yeah, great. Maybe you could put your email in the chat, Blake. Although I'm assuming it's just blake.mitchell@cpuc.ca.gov.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so my first question is actually on the cost and unit forecast page. It's the spend category. The description says like this type of spend forecast, this could be expense, so O&M, capital, and or foundational. But I think if just thinking in terms of like tabular data, wouldn't that be or just an or foundational? It wouldn't be and or, right? Because you would separate out the foundational costs from the capital and the expense costs.
Yeah, okay, that's probably poor phrasing. I think not every control, mitigation, or risk may have foundational. But yes, I think, and technically foundational, you could have expense and O&M. So maybe that actually should be 4 columns if parties want to see that, like more like direct capital, direct O&M, foundational O&M, foundational expense. I'm sorry, foundational O&M, foundational capital to the extent they're there.
Right.
So yeah, I think that was it. To try and give clarity, I mean, we could combine them, but if parties wanted to see it separate, obviously we would have that data available.
Yeah, well, I mean, what parties would probably want to see is just for sure expense and capital without the foundational costs added in. And and then you're correct that like the foundational costs can be separated into the foundational costs that go into an expense or the foundational costs that go into capital. So that's a good point. Yeah, great. I just wanted to highlight that. And then I believe I had another question on the baseline input section here. think there was a unit. Maybe I misread it.
I think the units would have been on the cost and work unit forecast tab. If that unit type, is that what you're looking for?
Oh, yeah. That is, you're absolutely right. So that would be like it says that the unit type would be a description of the work unit type as applicable, but then I don't see the actual like number of unit. Oh, I guess is that the work units, the ramp estimate work units?
Yeah, so this would be like 1,200, and then the unit type would be
see.
circuit miles, or 1,000 circuit breakers, or buildings, if
Yeah.
it's like a seismic retrofit or something like that.
But I was wondering, why would there be a description of the work unit type? Couldn't you just have one variable for unit type, and then if you need a description, could you just add another field that says description of unit type? Or is there a reason to? Yeah, I wasn't really sure what was meant by description of the work unit type.
So once again, we would like, instead of having a one cell in Excel that says 1,200 circuit miles, we were trying to split the number from the text.
Yeah, no, that I understand. I just wanted to make sure that like the only thing that would go in that field is just circuit miles. It wouldn't be like a description of like why you chose to use that
Oh, no,
particular
yeah,
unit type
no.
or something like that. Okay. Okay, so it's just okay, great. That helped to explain that. Let's see. I think those are the last of the questions that I had. I just had those outstanding kind of small detailed questions. I don't know if anybody else has any other follow-up questions for Dan and the SCE team. Nothing in the chat. So I think we'll probably have to end this a little bit early. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the next steps are just to, I just want to make sure that I'll give it one more minute. Does anybody object to us ending early? Okay, I see Vincent and Chris suddenly have their hands up. So Vince, you're first. Go ahead.
So Eddie, just curious, right? And maybe you mentioned this earlier, but at the end of all these workshops, you will have seen like 5 proposals from various parties, ourselves included. So I'd just like to understand what happens next. What's the process by which we settle on something?
Right, we did have a discussion about that. So the next steps would that be all of the workshop summaries would be filed, all of the data templates would be filed on the docket, and then we'll have a discussion internally and try to determine if the judge on the proceeding would like to issue ruling questions and would like to receive like a comment period. Oh, Vincent, your video was crazy there for a minute. Yeah, I am not certain yet if there will be a comment period for the technical working groups. It wasn't required in the scoping memo, and so we will leave that decision up to the judge, and he will let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then Chris, yeah.
Thank you. Well, since SCE is here, maybe I can ask. You mentioned earlier, the templates and also FERC and what would be captured here for the ramp and the GRCs. This relates back to the transmission question. So I know SCE has done, thousands of miles of covered conductor on its distribution system. Did SCE also do some kind of covered conductor on its transmission conductors? Do you happen to know?
I do not. I don't know if Gary or Brian do off the top of their head, but I don't know.
I don't know either.
Okay. I guess what I'm just curious about is, on these transmission mitigation, I'm just curious to get a better understanding of if that's going to be evaluated in the ramp. Because I know, substations kind of cross between distribution and transmission, but when it comes to transmission itself, and maybe you don't have an answer for it at the moment, but I would be interested in learning more about how that gets captured or not in the ramp. So.
Yeah, and I think like high level, once again, if that makes it as a risk, it will be in our ramp and it'll be in the rate case. Like we do have, transmission capital expenditures in our rate case, things like I think you mentioned towers. I think we have a tower corrosion maybe program and things of that nature. So, to the extent that it elevates itself to a ramp risk, it will be a ramp risk and it will then translate to the rate case. And, you can expect it to have the same type of rigor and analysis that any other ramp risk would, whether it's distribution, substation, or transmission.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Are there any other questions or thoughts that folks would like to ask before we close it out? Okay. Great, then I'm going to go ahead and call this one early, and we will all meet again at 10 o'clock on Monday morning to discuss the Sempra Company's data templates. And just as a reminder for Josh and the Sempra team, if you wanted to, this seemed to work pretty well. And I'll probably issue a poll, probably issue a couple of polls at the end of the SPD workshop, just asking people how they feel about using Teams. But so far, I haven't seen any problems. I don't know if anybody does have any technical problems, please mention it in the chat or just raise your hand right now before we end. But Josh will be available at 9:30 on Monday morning to do some tests and just make sure that everything runs smoothly. But so far, I think it worked pretty well, to be honest. I don't know, Dan, do you feel the same?
Yeah, I think, SE, we probably always prefer Teams. WebEx seems to give us a little because Teams is our kind of platform at the company. So yeah, there was, like I said, a little internal thing of me trying to send a Teams meeting with a different Teams link, but I think that was on me. I think there's an easy workaround on that. So yeah, I think this went really well. It's pretty easy, I think, to switch screens, switch presenters. So I think it went smoothly.
Sounds good. Yeah, Josh, did you have something you wanted to
add? Yeah, no, Eddie, I was just going to confirm that. Yeah, I'll be on at 9:30 to check in with the team. So thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. All right, everybody, I'm going to end this meeting. And if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me by email. So thank you for your time. And yes, Hannah, I will be in touch once the recording is available. I'm going to stop the recording right now. And we will share that with you.